Coming up on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we talk about the changes the offensive line has in store, and plus Cara McCutcheon right here. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Willis. Thank you for tuning in. If you notice me looking off to the side, I am watching the Ole Miss Alabama game for the post-game pod a little bit later. But right now, we are going to talk about the offensive line group and the changes that could be coming this season, and also players that you might need to keep an eye on. We always do this pretty consistently, but we will talk about players that you need to keep an eye on. Just a second. It moved on its own. All right. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. Hit the thumbs up button for notifications of new videos. And, of course, upvote the video if you can. So, the offensive line against Baylor. That is the last impression of this offensive line. I'm not overly worried about this offensive line because of against Alabama, it wasn't that problem. Against Texas A&M, it wasn't that problem. These are good defenses, good lines that did not cause problems for this offensive line. The Baylor game was different. Now, what do I attribute the Baylor game to? You have a freshman quarterback setting up protections. That's something that you have to do. Freshman quarterback setting up protections, there will be mistakes made. And second, Jeff Lebby was working two jobs at once, and there probably wasn't a simplicity of the game plan ready for Luke Altmaier, and even to some extent Matt Corral, because he just wasn't there. It's hard to ride two horses with one ass, as somebody would say. So just understand that the offensive line, I do not say Baylor is an indictment of the offensive line as a whole. I will not do that. I will not do that, period. But there are going to be some changes on the offensive line. For starters, I am told Bradley Sowell, who I do not just blank carte blanche trust him in everything, but I do think the offensive line coach at Ole Miss, that is a once-to-once generation, like, telephone game. Trust the information if the offensive line coach is telling it. And I think him and Jake Thornton do have a little bit of a repertoire between each other. And he says on the On3 Ole Miss Spirit podcast, a name to look out for is Jaden Williams, the I'm assuming red shirt freshman coming into the season. We'll see how that plays out. But apparently, other than an injury, it was really hard to keep him off the field last year. So he's a guy that could come in at one of the tackle positions. Now, this is interesting if that happens, because you have Nick Broker, you have Jeremy James, and you have Mason Brooks. There's a chance that all four positions could be manned by tackles. One of the guys could end up on the bench, and a guard comes in. Caleb Warren potentially could play center. Eli Acker has a role. The offensive line competition will be interesting for the Ole Miss Rebels this year. And that's not even counting on the transfer portal, which I think could actually happen. And I'll tell you where they might go with the transfer portal. But you could have Mason Brooks playing right tackle. You could have Jaden Williams playing left tackle. Nick Broker at left guard, and Jeremy James at right guard, and you have the tackles, your most experienced offensive linemen, playing the main offensive line positions other than center. So it'd be interesting to see exactly what happens there. Now, I think this offensive line is going to take a step going forward. And our question of the day for you to leave in the comments below, who do you expect to make the biggest impact on the offensive line in 2022? Who's it going to be? Who is the player that you expect to have the biggest impact on the offensive line in 2022? Do me a favor and leave a response in the comments below or tweet me at the Stephen Willis and let me know how you feel. Right now, I think the person that might make the biggest impact, one way or another, I'm going with Caleb Warren. Him playing center, if he plays center, it could be a big spring for him. That's something to keep an eye on this spring, is him and how he adjusts to playing the center position. It's a little bit different than playing the guard position. But you have all those athletic guys, like Nick Broker's a super athletic dude. You have all those guys playing on the offensive line, and I think they could really, really come alive. Anyway, BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march to the playoff, right to the big game this weekend. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of the new amazing offers available for the season, 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, when we come back a little bit later, Cara McCutcheon will join us at the third segment of the show, so tune in for that. All right, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen. The NBA trade deadline is Thursday, February 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and Locked On NBA Podcast will be covering it live from 2 to 4. Join Kim Becker, John Kralis, and Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to get analysis of every blockbuster move. Subscribe to Locked On NBA YouTube and turn your notifications on so you know when they go live. It's a big deal. Trade deadline. Everybody talks about that. And, organizations win professional sports in the United States. That's just the way it is. So, we talked in the first segment of where the offensive line currently sits. And the question becomes, what's left? Are they going to set it up to where the current players are the only option? Or are they going to try to add to it through the transfer portal? The transfer portal we currently have 3 or 4 spots depending on the 85. And because of that, you have to be very judicious. Now, Malik Heath is going to take one of those spots. We're kind of counting that or not whenever we do the numbers. But Malik Heath will be coming in to play wide receiver. So that'll leave 3 or 4 spots open. Now, Deion Smith is rumored. There's a receiver for Auburn that's rumored. And then that leaves 1 spot left. And that spot, I think, could come down to be a center. An Orlando Amana type player that could show up for fall camp. It all depends on spring practice and what goes on. But you can actually get improvement in a really big way at the center position if they need it. So it's one thing to keep an eye on in the transfer portal. Now, have I heard a name? No, I have not heard a name. I have not heard that they're going to take an offensive lineman. There's 20 offensive linemen currently on scholarship. So I do not know exactly how they're going to do that. But it's a position, much like we talked about, at the end of spring, you'll be able to tell how Lane Kiffin feels about this team with the players that he picks up. If he picks up a kicker, if he picks up a center, that is filling a hole and a need to put this team at an exemplary level. That's the point about that, an exemplary level. And in doing so, you might be in a really good position. He might think this is a playoff type team. Now, I'm not saying this is a playoff type team. I'm saying he might think that he's covering all his own bases to where if all the good things happen, all of a sudden you're playing for the playoff. And there's a lot of talent on this roster. This is the most talented roster I can remember at Ole Miss in my lifetime. Period. Unbelievably talented. I've heard rumors and looking through is like 30 players that were rated 4-star or higher in high school. And because of that, I think it's okay that Ole Miss fans raise their expectations. Absolutely raise your expectations. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're wrong and you're disappointed, so what? Grow up. This is a sports team. It doesn't matter if you get disappointed. It doesn't matter at the end of the day what happens one way or another. It's one of those things to take it like an adult and just enjoy the hope, the look forward. It isn't a life or death experience. It isn't. It's sports. It's fun. So there's no need to worry about getting your hopes up. Raise your expectations for this team. Period. Coming up in the next segment, Cara McCutcheon stops by to talk a little bit of everything, honestly. We touch on Brian Harsin a little bit as well. But Cara McCutcheon is going to come back and talk about that. Also, don't forget to tune in to SEC After Dark, Beast of the East and Best of the West on the Y'all's Conference Network. That's another YouTube channel. You can check it out there. They live stream Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night for your information. And they're going to be the Beast of the East is about the Eastern Division, Best of the West about the Western Division, and SEC After Dark is about the league as a whole. Pretty good show, pretty fun, kind of a different type format. It's not so much newsy. It's kind of just for people having a good time at SEC teams' expenses. All right, Cara McCutcheon joining us for a weekly segment where we get her perspective of what's going on around Ole Miss sports. Not a lot to talk about this week. We had the firestorm that was Jackson Dart and Michael Trigg. That's kind of died down. We had signing day passed. I guess the first question I will ask you is, the rumors that Cut could be going to Texas to steal Arch Manning away, is that the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard or not?
I think it's actually expected. You know, when Cutcliffe announced, I guess, his retirement or parting ways with Duke, I think the goal are, I think Georgia, I think Ole Miss, I think anyone that's kind of in the game for Arch is going after Cutcliffe. Like, I think that's a huge pull with the Mannings. And I think the other thing that's smart about it is if you look at longevity and the way the head coaching role is going right now, having that stable development there with Cutcliffe at a university is huge. So I think this was kind of expected that was always going to kind of come into play.
Yeah, and people do that. They try to connect the dots and do the easy way to do it. But if it was Eli, yes, absolutely, Cut would make a difference. If it was Peyton, absolutely that would make a difference. If either Eli or Peyton was looking for a college and Archie was involved, yes, absolutely that'd make a difference. Cooper, he's not exactly so tight with that. It's just there's a lot of assumptions being made over the Eli situation, in my opinion. And honestly, to me, this reeks of a desperate move by Texas to try and stay in it.
I agree. I definitely agree. But I think there's a lot of universities that are going to try to make that play at Cutcliffe and think that that's going to be that tool that's going to bring in Arch. But I agree with you. I don't think he's the pool that is kind of Cooper's looking for. I think if so, I mean, Cutcliffe has family in Oxford. He has every reason to go back to Oxford. I think we would have made a bigger push. He has history in Oxford. So I agree. I think there's definitely a desperate plea on Texas to keep themselves in the game. But I don't think it's the deciding factor.
No, not at all. Today's show, we talked a little bit about the offensive line play at Ole Miss going post-spring into spring practice. And what are you looking for from this group? Are there anything that you were expecting, any surprises you're expecting from this group?
I'm actually kind of really excited to see this offense. Like, this offense has so many weapons, and it's only building. And so I think, as everyone knows, the offensive line was a little bit of the weak point. And if we can build some strengthening here into this offensive line, we have a lot of explosive weapons that could come out. So I think that's really key for over, I guess, spring trade and through the fall, like really just strengthening on that offensive line. But we just have these explosive weapons here. And I think with Jackson Dart, we can really make a lot of things happen. So I'm excited for this offense.
Yeah, and I'll put the disclaimer out for you just like I do for me because it needs to be said. We're not saying Jackson Dart will absolutely be the quarterback. Luke Maltmeyer has a chance, but Jackson Dart being here means Luke Altmaier needs to clearly beat out Jackson Dart to take the field. Tie goes to Jackson Dart in that situation. Let's talk. Baseball season is right around the corner. Anything you're looking forward to there?
So I was a huge Nick fan. I'm sad that he's gone, but I'm so excited for Dustin Diamond. I'm super excited to see this pitching core we have going up. I think we got a lot of big hitters. I'm a huge Elko fan. I'm just huge on him, and I'm so excited to see where he leads this team. I think we got a lot of talent, so I'm very excited.
This team hit 85 home runs last year. You think they can get to 100?
I hope we push them to get to 100. I hope they really have that excitement to push themselves to that. I mean, everything I've seen from these guys, they all are talking about that the goal is Omaha. And I think we would all love to see that dream. I think with Bianco getting, he was just recently, it was, is it the Olympic team or the American team captain? So I think, there's a lot of talent there as him as a coach. And I think we can really push. I think a lot of people look at the seasons and think, we're just going to get out in the regionals. But I think we can really push and get to that into Omaha this year. I'm really hoping to see that.
And everybody can now relax a little bit because I have talked baseball on this podcast. I know y'all have been asking for it. I have now talked baseball. We have a preview coming up Monday that will surprise you a little bit. Tim Elko, actually, I think he finished with 17 home runs last year and didn't play 6 or 7 weeks of the season. So there's a chance you could see a record fall this year, but I think there could be some light tower power going on with Tim Elko. Spring training is right around the corner, though. And what are you looking most forward to in spring training this year?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say for the spring training, I'm looking for seeing some of that development coming along, that gelling. We have a lot of new guys out there. I'd like to see how the team, I think one of the biggest things Matt Corral brought was that team element that everyone's needed. We need everybody to make things happen. So I like to see that team gelling. We have Evan now, we have Trigg, we just have a lot of guys from Auburn, all these new guys that have come in. And I think if we can establish some kind of core, some kind of brotherhood, I think that's a huge thing about the culture at Ole Miss. And that was what we saw, a lot of success there in this last team.
Yeah, if you look at this last team, Matt Corral was the undisputed leader, but he was also here since 2018. He was here for 4 full years, and it's easy to take that leadership mantra when those guys know you and look up to you and classes coming in and you're the guy. Ole Miss has to find the guy for 2022. Whoever that's going to be. It's not going to be Jackson Dart. It's not going to be Luke Altmaier. They're young guys. It's going to probably have to be somebody like Nick Broker, somebody on the defensive line like KD Hill. In the defensive backfield, Otis Reese. These are guys that have built up a little bit of cachet of respect. I think it has to come from them. And if you're looking at a surprise, it could be somebody like Miles Battle could step forward and he has the personality that others might follow.
I would definitely agree there. I think Otis Reese has really built a rapport. We've seen some of these young guys coming in. He's mentioned in their Twitter posts. So I think he's already kind of starting that leadership style with these guys and kind of taking on that role.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time that these next 6 weeks leading into spring training is basically the foundation for leadership for your team. These people going through workouts and all that, and a hierarchy is going to develop. It's going to carry over into spring. It's going to do summer, and by the time you get to fall, you will have an expanded group of 4 or 5 true leaders of the team that you can count on. You can start to build. The problem is you need those guys to be the right guys.
Correct. I agree. I think this team has come very far. I'm excited to see what Kiffin has. I'm excited to see what some of our new staff members have. I'm excited about Chris Kiffin to see what he brings back. The defense we had where he was there before, our defensive line, Racklin Kimdichie, was just bad. I'm just excited to see that land shark kind of come back and see what Partridge and Kiffin can do there. So.
All right, we talked Ole Miss Sports a little bit. We're going to go off topic a little bit. If everybody does not want to listen to what we're about to say, thank you for watching the podcast. But, Cara, have you been following the soap opera that is the Auburn Tigers football program this week?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So socially, what is going on in the social media? Have you been hanging out in what is it called, Twitter Spaces and things like that?
So I missed some of the spaces just from with work, but so Arkansas fans actually started an Auburn trolling space talking about Harsin. This kind of spiraled into this huge discussion that basically they were saying he was fired. And it just became huge that these Arkansas fans started. And essentially they were talking about bringing in Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze was coming and Harsin was out. Hugh Freeze was going to bring in all this staff and these recruits. And I mean, it just exploded that this was going to happen when it turned out it was actually a bunch of Arkansas fans that were just basically trolling the Auburn fan base.
That's absolutely nuts. Also, the Hugh Freeze notes, are you really going to run out a coach over a rumor of impropriety and then go to Hugh Freeze?
Freeze. I think the correlation has been matched there 100%. And between the two of us, I honestly don't think Hugh Freeze would go. I think Hugh Freeze has a great job at Liberty. I think he's in a kind of cushy position there, and I just don't see him leaving.
No Freedom of Information Act. No. He doesn't have to worry about a Steve Robertson going through his phone records or even requesting them because Liberty doesn't have to give it up. Yeah. That's actually a big deal. Actually, believe it or not, for three years, I was the office next door to Hugh Freeze. And then when Hugh Freeze became the tight ends coach, I was right next to Maurice Harris. So I'm kind of familiar with that staff because it was basically tangentially related to the one that I was on. And I'm not a big Hugh guy. I've not made any bones about that. I'm not a big Frank guy because Frank Wilson and Hugh Freeze did a lot of water toting for Ed Orgeron. And there's some stuff that I need to get past that I can't really get past. But I do think Hugh Freeze would walk to Auburn for that job because he so desperately wants to be an SEC coach. He would move for that. I don't think he would necessarily do it for the ACC or the Big 12 or any other conference, but the SEC has a pull to the point where I think one day Vanderbilt is going to come open and they're going to hire Hugh Freeze. That's how I think this works out for him.
I see it. I can see that. I just, I don't know family-wise if that would be a move they're going to make back to the SEC. I think they're in a great position where they're at. They have I think the exposure you get in the SEC as an SEC coach is a little bit broader. I think Harsin's learning that now coming from Boise State. So I would say I would kind of be a little shocked to see if Hugh Freeze did come back into that arena.
Yeah. It could happen. I think his ego is going to drive and get him in trouble one last time because his ego is really what did him in at Ole Miss. Once he got to the point where he thought he had made it and he was hanging out with NASCAR drivers and Danica Patrick and all of that kind of swole that head on Hugh Freeze, and he kind of ended as a different person than he got there. And I think
Stenhouse coming in and being kind of the Ole Miss fan at that point. Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. So I'm interested. I'm also interested, by the way, as Frank Wilson being the gatekeeper for Brian Kelly at LSU. I want to see how that plays out too, because Frank Wilson has a job because Brian Kelly's been there like 2 months and he's already faked a Southern accent. He's done some kind of weird booty dance with a recruit they didn't get. Yeah, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff out there. I don't know if Frank Wilson will be able to turn that and make that a recruit-worthy thing. It'll be interesting to see.
I agree. I also think that Lane Kiffin will never give up on calling those things out. So I wish them luck with that because whatever they do, there will be Lane Kiffin ready to comment. So
yeah, it should be quite good. Anyway, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Tomorrow we will continue our post-Springs previews and have Tom Vanderford on the show. Now make the second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with the expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms. Cara, thank you so much for coming by this week for your weekly statement. We're going to do it again next week, and hopefully we'll have a lot of fun. We'll have some baseball to talk about next week. There we go. I brought up baseball again, everybody, so they can be happy about that. So we're going to talk about a little baseball next week.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. And to everybody, hotty toddy.
Hotty toddy.